back to what we were talking about, the anti-imperialistic message. If you could put that in context with when you were talking about Jeremy Corbyn versus Bernie Sanders here in America.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jeremy Corbyn has taken a more radical left-wing position on foreign policy than Bernie Sanders took during the primary. So if you remember during the primary, Bernie mostly talked about a continuation of Obama's foreign policy. Bernie said explicitly that he was not against the drone war, and he said explicitly that he would not support further intervention in Syria of the kind that Clinton has talked about, like a no-fly zone. But he didn't talk about rolling over completely on a lot of the positions that the Obama administration has taken in the Middle East. It was maybe a little bit more friendly to Russia than Obama's, but not very much. Corbyn, on the other hand, has taken a lot of very radical positions. He has said that he would like to see Britain leave NATO. He's said that he would like to see Britain promise not to participate in any bombing mission in Syria under any circumstance. He wants to get rid of Britain's nuclear program, Trident. And these kinds of positions, which view Britain as a badly intentioned actor in the Middle East. That's the way that it's perceived, that Corbyn thinks that Britain, when it intervenes in the Middle East, then it intervenes egoistically and selfishly and for its own benefit, and that it would just be better off, that the region would be better off if Britain stayed out of it. Whereas with Sanders, I don't get as much of a sense that Sanders thinks that the United States is out to do harm in the region. It's more that he thinks that the actions that are on the table are not constructive. And so that is a weaker argument that doesn't tell people who in the past have voted for candidates that have supported interventions and who themselves may have supported interventions, that they're part of some kind of villainous or evil project, which I think anti-imperialism often implicitly says. Anti-imperialists say that George Bush and Tony Blair are war criminals. And if you voted for them, you voted for a war criminal. Whereas with Bernie, it's more, no, those guys made mistakes. They were in error. They thought they could accomplish something good, but they couldn't. It's kind of a question of whether you think that the people running these interventions are well-intentioned but mistaken, or if you think that they are exploitative and villainous.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm obviously on the left where I believe is exploitation and villainous, right? However, what I would argue is if you accept that the government is corrupted, how can you still believe in an altruistic view and how that government treats other countries that it's not responsive to? It almost seems illogical to believe that you're out there trying to do good when, ultimately, throughout societies across our history, we have, usually an elite capture of the state, and then they use the state to put forth their own ends, and that we go through that cycle over and over and over again. So I'm wondering, why does that illusion exist in America, and why is it so pervasive?
Well, earlier I talked about two schools of academic international relations theory, realism and liberalism. And I think that oftentimes our government acts for realist reasons. The realists believe that states should act to defend and advance their own power, because by defending and advancing your own power, you protect yourself from enemies. The liberals believe that we should be using international institutions to create a set of norms that allow us to transcend that history of power competition. And I think a lot of the time we act for realist reasons, or for at least what people think are realist reasons, but then the PR is liberal. The PR is liberal humanitarianism. So we will go into a country because we think that that country poses a threat to us, or because we think if we go into that country, we can tip it from a regime that isn't friendly to us to one that is. But then a lot of people will justify that on the grounds that, well, the regime is run by people who are going to massacre their own people, or going to commit war crimes, or are authoritarian, or are communist, or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember someone said that America's oftentimes, well, first off, let's all be clear here. America at this point is projecting maybe like a global hegemony. It's kind of, I hate to use that word, but that's really kind of what they're doing. in a sense. After World War II, they've been on that project for a very long time, and it's within that context that I would say that, you know, to me, that type of thing is unsustainable. You know, no one is able to hold on to supremacy, you know, the way that, you know, the United States kind of pursues it, you know, for extended periods of time. It's always things are always shifting and changing, right? And so they talk about this global stability that's been achieved, and really what that amounts to is almost like an American dominance. And I'm saying, you know, if you continue in this manner, what happens when that dominance is no longer there?
Yeah. It's interesting. When I did my master's at University of Chicago, I took a course with John Mearsheimer, who is an offensive realist. He thinks that states, in order to survive, their best strategy is to conquer other states and get hegemony over regions. And once you have hegemony over your region, then you want to prevent any other state from getting hegemony over their region, so you intervene in other regions, but on his view, only to prevent hegemons from rising. He opposes a more muscular interventionist position where you intervene in every country to try to make every country around the world friendly to you. And he calls that position a global domination position, which is what he thinks predominates in policymaking. So it's interesting that you can find in our academic ranks a lot of people who do want the United States to defend its position of power, but who nonetheless think that a lot of the stuff that we do is counterproductive or unhelpful toward that aim.
Now that's an interesting distinction, because obviously I was speaking about, you know, viewing it as a, you know, as a world domination strategy, and I actually am partial to having regional powers basically, you know, do their thing, and we have each region kind of respects the other region in some sense, and within that region there may be conflict and struggle, but it won't be, you know, a global struggle. You know, I'm kind of, you can reach an equilibrium at that level, perhaps. I'm not sure. That's all theoretical, or not here or there. But I like that you brought that up, because that is kind of what I believe should be our foreign policy, maybe like a more regional thing. And that would mean, you know, perhaps understanding and respecting other regions. But when someone hears me say that, it's so out there and it's so left field. They're like, what do you mean? No, of course we have to do this, because if we don't, someone else will. And I'm like, well, what? What do you think of that argument that America must dominate, because if America does not dominate, then someone else will, and who knows what they'll do? I've heard that argument before as well.
There was an old Cold War argument about that between people who believed in perimeter defense and strong point defense. And the perimeter defenders believed that you can't allow the Soviet Union to dominate any one country, because if they dominate any one country, it will be the beginning of a domino theory in which they take over the whole world. And there were defenders of strong point defense who said there are certain areas of the world where we have to prevent the Soviets from having power, because they're areas of the world where our allies are located, or where there's a lot of wealth, or it's strategically very important. But in most areas, we should leave it be, because it's not worth the resources. And that debate went on within a group of people, all of whom were committed to the project of America being the most dominant country. But it's interesting that the strong point defense position often overlaps in terms of policy output with a lot of people with a more left-wing position who say that you shouldn't go into a lot of different conflicts. So in the case of the Vietnam War, you could find a lot of strong point defenders arguing with the left-wing hippie movement that the Vietnam War was a waste of everybody's time and money.